What's up, everybody? My name is Circus, aka Stealing Your Mail, and I am bringing you part 2 of this intermediate/beginner's guide to Hunt Showdown. Now, the intent of this guide series is to share some knowledge past the beginner level that isn't readily available. If you watched part 1, you have my sincerest thanks. Last time was pretty basic. We talked a bit about MMR, money, loadouts, and traits. This time, we're going to get into some gameplay, but before we do, we're going to spend a quick second talking about aiming and sensitivity. So, some general aiming advice first. Get a gaming mousepad if you don't have one. A SteelSeries QCK is a good, cheap starter pad, and it's very popular for games like Counter-Strike. I like the heavy version, and I use them for over a decade. The advantage of a gaming pad, besides the quality, is its size. A lot of gaming pads can give you up to 50 centimeters of room to work with, and I personally use an LG Saturn Pro, which is 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. For a gaming mouse, find one with a shape that you like. I find the Logitech G Pro to be pretty universal. I'm pretty specific with regards to what I like in a mouse shape, but the egg shape of the G Pro is pretty evergreen and pretty hard to hate. Also, learn to hold your mouse properly and don't death grip it. If you can, you want to use a similar sensitivity in most shooting games that you play. So if your buddies want to play Call of Duty, you can still be building some amount of muscle memory for a game like Hunt. Games can feel different, so this isn't going to be one-to-one, but it's better than having wildly different sensitivities. We can easily achieve this by finding an object in-game and putting our mouse at the edge of the mousepad while we look at said object. We can slowly move our mouse to the opposite edge of the pad and adjust our sensitivity value to make that a 360. So 360 is from one edge of the mousepad to the other. If that's too slow or if that's too fast, we can fine tune it, but that's a quick way to establish a baseline in any shooting game. There are some great websites like mousesensitivity.com that can convert your sensitivity between games, but anything that gives us a constant is going to be good. Speaking of sensitivity, I am not going to tell you what's best, that's for you to decide. I see a lot of new players crank their sensitivity for no real reason, and typically, I think most people could stand to lower their sensitivity. But use what you like and give high and low sensitivities a try if you haven't. If you change your sense, it's best to change it and leave it for a few sessions before you alter it again. I'd suggest using a DPI between 400 and 1200, but that's my personal preference. But getting back to Hunt specifically, there's some common advice out there to set all of these values, or at least default aim down the sights, and shoulder aim to the same number, so say 1.0 for example. Unfortunately, this does not translate to identical sensitivities for each aiming style. That is to say, setting both our default aim to 1.0 and our shoulder aim to 1.0 gives us two different sensitivities when in-game. If you want to have all of your sensitivities the same, meaning a similar feeling mouse input across all the different aiming methods and scopes, I would recommend using the Hunt Showdown sensitivity calculator, which I will link down below. Due to the changes in FOV across the aiming styles, you need to set the numbers quite specifically if you want all the inputs to feel similar, and this calculator is going to do the math for you. I'm not claiming that this is the best way to aim, but it's how I like my game set up, and I thought this would be interesting to share. The aiming in Hunt always felt off to me, and I can never quite put my finger on why. We've all noticed that Hunt's crosshair is not actually in the center of the screen, it's a little bit lower. So it's important to keep this in mind when you peek a hunter, because we want to try to put the crosshair area of our screen at the enemy's suspected head level before we peek. Now, Hunt has three methods of shooting. We have our typical aim down the sights, we have shoulder aim, and we have what I would call point shooting. Aiming down the sights is the slowest, but it makes you the most accurate. Shoulder aim is also pretty accurate, and there's really no reason to aim down the sights with shotguns. Weapons like the Sparks can be fired from the hip at close range with pretty good accuracy. Shoulder aim is a great way to slow someone down or to make them think twice about rushing you. It can also be a great way to finish off an opponent. Now, I use shoulder aim and hip fire interchangeably. The gist of point shooting is this. We preemptively have our crosshair at the head level of our opponent. We raise our gun, we aim, and we fire, all in one single motion. This is worth practicing because it's a quick way to take a shot and also works as a great follow-up. Aiming down the sights in Hunt can really expose you to getting headshot. Hunt is actually a pretty mobile game. Hunters can absolutely bob and weave and parkour around a compound. but your mobility is drastically reduced when you take too much time to aim. That means if I was to peek a door like this, I would be moving slower than if I tried to point shoot at somebody. To be fair, I might be more accurate with aiming down the sights, or even expose less of my character model's hitbox if I'm not careful, but I think it's important to recognize the vulnerability that aiming causes within this game. Another note for aiming is that when we lead targets, it's easiest to think about it in terms of hats. So to lead a target in Hunt, move your crosshair 1 or 2 hats in front of them. This is a skill that you have to practice, and it depends on the velocity of the gun. As a general rule, weapons with a higher velocity likely require less lead than you think, and weapons with a slower velocity probably require a little bit more than you think, but it depends on distance. Positioning is just as important in Hunt. Look at it this way, most guns will kill you in 2 hits. Whether you're playing solo, duos, or trios, consider you will likely be going up against multiple people simultaneously. We always want to limit our opponent's line of sight on us because if multiple people shoot us, we're essentially dead. So when we peek or we return fire, we want to keep a few things in mind. We don't want to peek the same spot or angle twice. We want to constantly have our head in different positions and at different heights, and we want to limit our exposure to any angle we are not immediately shooting at. Everything that you do in Hunt makes noise. Experienced players are going to have a rough idea of where you'll be peeking from if they're close enough to hear your footsteps. So keep that in mind and try to leave your opponent guessing. On the flip side of that, the fact that every single piece of terrain makes noise means that you can spam footsteps using all the different noises a hunter can make to mask your next move. When it comes to moving our head, we can jump and crouch to put our head at different heights. We can also simply look down at the ground to help tuck our head's hitbox in, which is useful when rezzing, looting, or running from cover to cover. We can jump peek doors or windows because we have some air control in this game. You are also accurate while shooting during the ascent of a jump, but not the descent, so you can shoot while going up, but not while coming down. So what does all of this mean? It means that combat in Hunt requires us to stay fluid and mobile. We don't want to spend too much time in one spot because that means we're going to be peeking the same angles multiple times. If we stay too stationary, our opponents are free to take real estate and find new positions. You've probably seen this if you've ever trapped up a boss lair. Likewise, it's important for you to use your positioning to take ground on your opponents should they be offering it. This is forcing people to play your game. If your opponent isn't really peeking you or is just camping in a building, you're very free to get a better position or angle. And my recommendation is, if they're camping that hard, to just move on and ambush them later. If your opponents are pushing you, especially if you're outnumbered, you need to keep moving and rotating and looking for different angles onto them while limiting the angles they have on you. Fighting while retreating is very good in Hunt, especially if your weapon outranges theirs. The fact of Hunt is that the weapons operate in an almost rock, paper, scissors fashion. Players often want to take every single fight that comes their way. But realistically, one of the absolute best ways to improve at any shooting game, including Hunt, is to play your life. That means you are actively trying to not die. If you think about your actions before you do them, it allows you to step back a bit and think about the why. I'm not advocating to play like a coward or to never push. What I am saying is, take a second to think about what type of fight you're about to get into and how you can spin that to your advantage. If the fight is significantly to your disadvantage, it might be better to try and find a new approach. In the previous video, I mentioned that it's best to be the first or the last to a location, such as a boss lair, and this is one of the major reasons why. If we are there first, we can set up shop and defend the area. That's a no-brainer. If we are there last, we can use the sound of the first attacking team to mask our own movement. There can often be more flexibility in approaching a situation like this, rather than being the team in the middle. If you ever find yourself in between two teams, it's often best to rotate out and come in behind one of them. This is why setting up our tools and consumables to help us deal with AI can be so important. Rotating quickly and controlling our pace of movement is going to work in our favor. The less time that we have to spend setting up a given situation so that the fight is on our terms is a big part of improving at Hunt, and only taking fights on your terms is a great methodology to apply to your game. Obviously, you can't control every situation, and that's where your raw skill and aim is going to come in. Like I mentioned in the first video, Hunt involves getting other people to play your game. That means using your mobility to relocate and to take fights that are favorable to you. That means to play to the strength of your loadout while actively trying to minimize the effectiveness of your opponent's weapons. So that's going to do it for part 2, and hey, thank you for sticking with me. So far, we talked about setting up our loadouts and hunters, we've talked about traits, and now we've talked about aiming, shooting, and movement. In part 3, we're going to talk about playing solo, playing with a team, and how to work the map to our advantage. If you like the content, I would appreciate a like and would love it if you subscribed. Check me out on Twitch at Circus TV. And as always, good luck out there in the bayou.